the Land Act, the Land Registration Act, and the Matrimonial Property Act. It really further ensures that, and reinforces that, that this rule, and really ensures the equality. But unfortunately, implementation is not really happening. Are we really ensuring that this is happening? How can we really reinforce those laws so that we can really see tangible results? And here I want to also add the social and cultural discriminatory barriers that are also an impediment. So those are the issues that really the report is highlighting, and really listening to colleagues, panelists. Those are the issues that we are really raising, that we are still really struggling in order to address them. So we really have this collective responsibility to come together and really address those challenges. Of course, the report also advanced some recommendations to address the findings that I just listed, including, for instance, gender transformative approaches that are cost-effective and that can really change the discriminatory norms at local level. And we are working very closely at the county level with the national government and other partners to address this. Other recommendations, for instance, refer to closing the gap in lender tenure, access to formal child care that is beneficial on mothers' employment, and also introduction of social protection, and Shahen, you mentioned that, to really increase the resilience of women working in agro-food systems with approach such as the cash transfer and cash plus that as FAO we have been really introducing in our programs. Implementation, of course, implementing those recommendations to close the gap in agro-food systems is not really a matter of urgency, but is really the right thing to do, and it really makes economical sense. So for that to happen, again, really partnership is essential. At FAO, let me say that gender equality and women's economic empowerment is really mainstreamed in our programming and in our monitoring and really reporting. We really measure gender against, of course, our outputs, our outcomes, and indicators. And I understand that this is really what we also aim to see if we look, of course, at our laws, our frameworks, our regulatory. It's really very, very important. And actually, the Senator was talking about monitoring, which the inclusion is so essential. Of course, so many examples that I could really share, but for the sake of time, I will not do so, that are really showing that we are working towards addressing those challenges at the county level. And of course, I should maybe conclude to say that, but all this should really be deliberate, intentional. We have to make sure that we bring it to our policies. This is the only way we can really close the gap, we can really transform agro-food systems in order to really, they're resilient, they're inclusive, they're sustainable, and of course for the transformations that we aim. Of course, if we have time, I can really come with examples, but I really wanted to present the findings of the reports and to say that we really have to come together to address, because there are still so many challenges, particularly with regards to women in economic empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla, for that. And I agree, we need to be intentional. And once again, the issue that Senator Catherine Muma raised of the rule of law, that we actually just implement what the law requires. And that also means that we be intentional. Let me come to you, Madam Grace Wasike. You have heard many of the challenges, many of the benefits, and some of the challenges that have been faced with the various affirmative action measures that the government has put in place. And the Kenya Kwanza government has the bottom-up economic transformation plan, BETA, which focuses on delegating decision-making powers from other levels of governance to the local level. How is the State Department for Gender utilizing the bottom-up economic transformation plan to support county governments to integrate affirmative action into their plans and processes. I will ask you, please, 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Madam Session Chair. Allow me, first of all, to convey the apologies of my boss, who is the CS Public Service, Gender and Affirmative Action, Honorable Aisha Juma. So I would just like to ride on to what my fellow panelists have already mentioned, most of the things about affirmative action, but I would wish to just add on to what Senator Muma has defined affirmative action to be. Let us look at Article 260 of the Constitution to also get more information on the definition of affirmative action. It's not about women, but it is a strategy that is supposed to address issues concerning historical injustices of discrimination and other areas. So now to the question about what the ministry is doing with regard to supporting affirmative action plans and processes. The ministry has come up with so many frameworks, including policies, that are supposed to support not only county governments, but also the other government agencies. And one of them is the Intergovernmental Consultative Framework for the Gender Sector. This is a framework that is anchored on the Intergovernmental Relations Act of 2012. Most sectors are supposed to come up with their forum so that we have concerted efforts in the various sectors. So for the gender sector, under this framework, we have gender sector working groups, which have been devolved to the counties. And one of the thematic areas that they're supposed to address is women in leadership and decision making. So we expect that counties will be able to leverage on such a platform to ensure that they reach out to the members of this honorable framework so that they are able to implement their plans and actions to achieve issues of affirmative action. As a ministry, we've also supported counties to come up with various policies, including the gender workplace policies and also policies on sexual and gender-based violence. You realize that we cannot achieve the leadership platform without addressing issues of gender-based violence, as alluded to by my predecessor panelists. So we've supported the counties in terms of technical capacities. Most of them have come up with those policies, gender policies, that will be able to guide them on how to implement issues gender. As a State Department for Gender, we've also come up with other documents, including a manual on training women in political leadership, and this was used a lot during the previous elections, where women, almost 2,000 women, benefited from the trainings from various stakeholders and partners, including the State Department for Gender. We've also come up with a strategy on achieving, a strategy on SDG 5, on achieving equality for all women and girls. So this is a strategy that was developed in 2020, and we expect it to run up to 2025, and it will be supporting and guiding government institutions on how that goal should be achieved. Last year, we came up with gender mainstreaming guidelines for the public sector, and we expect that counties make use of this document to analyze their institutions, undertake gender audits, and be able to come up with strategies that will support gender mainstreaming in the counties. We've also had a national women economic empowerment strategy of 2020 to 2025, and this is a document that we are reviewing to align it to the BITA agenda so that it is current. But it has been in place and we've been disseminating it and ensuring that it is adopted by the various stakeholders. Apart from the unpaid care policy that the country representative for UN Women mentioned, we are also going to come up with a national policy on affirmative action as mandated in the executive order to the State Department for Gender and Affirmative Action. And lastly, we have, okay, I'm not going to mention all the frameworks, but I've just picked on the key ones. Lastly, this has already been mentioned by Senator Muma about the multi-agency working group, which was constituted by our CS, and it is, like she has mentioned, it is facing some hurdles, but we hope that it will be up and running, and we expect that in the next 6 months, we'll be able to come up with a framework that will be guiding us not only about political positions, but everything about the two-thirds, whether it's in appointive positions, whether elective, anywhere that we need to balance, that framework should be able to guide us. And as the group, the multi-agency group starts its work, we'll be expecting that it anchors most of the provisions on the Constitution, including articles such as the Article 10, Article 27, 81, 97, 98, 100, 175, and 177. I know it is a team that has strong brains, so we'll be expecting a lot from that team. And yeah, we hope that we'll be getting an answer on this elusive two-thirds principle that has not been realized since the promulgation of the Constitution. Otherwise, thank you, and I return it to the session chair.
Thank you so much, Madam Grace, and we appreciate the work that the ministry is doing, and we expect some good success. Wangeshi, you have heard many of the challenges, and of course, I've been working to address many of the challenges that have been faced, from gender-based violence, the crisis of teen pregnancies, adolescent health, and women's economic empowerment. We know that one of the affirmative action measures that the government has put in place is AGPO. And while AGPO has the opportunity to be a great game changer, we know that there has been a low uptake and there are very many challenges related to it. You, as a civil society actor, CREW, what deliberate and strategic support towards increasing access to AGPO, but also addressing some of the challenges like issues around GBV and shelters that are there to house women who have suffered gender-based violence?
Thank you, and I'm very, very delighted to be here. Daisy, that's a very loaded question.
And you have only 5 minutes.
And I only have 5 minutes. But let's start from AGPO. And for me, why AGPO is important, because it's an affirmative action procurement opportunity so that women, people with disability, but also the youth can be able to access. But when you look at, data is the one that really tells us what is happening. When you look at the uptake by women is 8.8%, for the youth is 7%, for people with disabilities 1.2. What does that tell you? That's about 17%. And if you're talking about 30% and we are just above average, then there are issues there. And I think it's good for us to be able to name the issues so that then we can be able to find the solutions. And allow me to reflect on some of the challenges. One of them is around the complex business compliance. We are talking about tax. We are talking about registration. We are talking about the application process. That's already a barrier for women, youth, and people with disability to be able to access that. In the last panel, they talked about corruption. And corruption is manifested in 3 ways. One is that there is constant, the people issuing these tenders are looking for kickbacks, or they are looking for the proportion of the money that is being given for these tenders. But right there is also another layer for women because of sex exploitation. I don't think we even have, do you have a county with a with safeguarding policy? Maybe at the show of hand in the counties in the room, because we are all 47 counties, are there safeguarding policy around issues of sexual harassment? I think we need to investigate whether they do exist. And allow me to quote one of the counties. One of the women told us, the procurement agents, mostly men, usually say, use what you have so that you get what you want. That statement is loaded, because right there is around issues of power, is around, because one person has the power to give this tender, and the other person is coming from a place of disempowerment, and therefore they have to use what they have. What do they have? They have zero. The only thing they have is their body. And really a shame that is happening in our modern day. And then when you look at what kind of business are women and young women and people with disability doing in terms of this tender, it's the lowest of the values. They clean, they supply tea, they supply stationery. Vitu za chini, when you've eaten bread and kumebaki crumbs, that's what they take. What does that tell you? That the kind of businesses that they are doing, they make very small margin. Never mind that even when they have that tender, to go and get financial support to be able to, they can work with their tender LPO to a bank and say, I've come with my LPO and I'm looking for financing. First and foremost, the bank classified them as they are not bankable. They have no credit history. They haven't been able to do business. So how are they ever going to access credit then to be able to supply? And then the final one here is around the amount of time that takes to be paid. It takes 1 year, it takes 2 years, it takes 3 years. Why? I already did the business, just pay me. And right there, also issues of sexual exploitation do happen. So there are many issues, and I could go on and on. But what is it that we are doing as an organization? One, we are getting out there to tell women, yes, AGPO exists, but also helping them to navigate all these challenges, including, for example, compliance, because compliance keep coming all the time. And then one other thing that we're doing is to get even into the radio spaces at the community level so that we can be able to talk about the existing of these opportunities. Also very, very important is that we have an open governance partnership where we are looking how do we advocate more so that this process is transparent, this process is fair, and is also accountable. Because when the tender is put out there, how many women get to know? You must be close to power to be able to understand that it does exist. So there is work that needs to be done out there so that more women can be able to access. And then around financial inclusion, and allow me to share a model that we have done, working very closely with 3 partners, supported with MasterCard Foundation, and working with Roots Kenya, but also the Center for Gender and Development. We developed a model because even within the women, there is also another challenges of violence against women and girls. If a woman who is freeing from a home that is violent, she has no title deed, she has nothing she's putting into her name. So we created what we call Jasiri. And Jasiri is a Swahili name that means bold, meaning we must be able to do things that are audacious. 10 years, we can only be talking about audacious things. And we set this fund to be able to work with women who are survivors of violence. is a guarantee fund hosted by one of the local banks, because we also want to work with the banks so that they can be able to change their system and structures. So that if a woman works with a bank and a young woman who has no credit history, who is guaranteeing her to be able to get that fund? So we have been able to support 1,000 women, and we're hoping that we can be able to grow. And the women can be able then to access a fund so that they can be able to run their business. And running their business also comes with financial independence, meaning if she feels she can be able to stay in this relationship, she can stay. If she wants to walk out from a place that is environment, then she's financially able to take care of things. Because a lot of financial dependence also comes with violence. So where are we right now? As we do, they take the money. I think Governor Wanga here closely, she said, don't just give the money. It must be accompanied with business development skills so that then the women can thrive. Because if we don't do that, then we'll be setting them for failure. We are now looking to scale up this work, and we are hoping to come to more counties. We are going to be in 16 counties so that we can be able to work with more women and really be able to challenge so that the women can be able to thrive. Daisy, around county, we have an opportunity there. We have supported Meru County, Isiolo, Narok, Nyeri, Nairobi to put in a policy, because we believe once you have a policy, then it moves to the county integrated plan. We are able to move to the budget. I think Governor Wanga put it very well that if you have no budget line, it's very difficult. We just continue. So we need to see the budget line for the counties where these resources are being put. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wangeshi, and congratulations for the great work that you continue to do as an institution to empower women. Now, panelists, we are closing out this panel. And I'm going to come to each and every one of you for an actionable point. An actionable point, here we have county governments, we have senators, we have MCAs, we have decision makers in the room. We want actionable points that we can actually give recommendations that can be acted upon. And I'm going to start with you, Your Excellency, Governor Gladys Wanga. You have heard some of the challenges, and I think you also talked about the audit, when you were giving money, and you are saying the women's group used to be here, yes, here in the bush. So one of the issues is formalization of business. Wangeshi has talked about the cumbersome process, and while personally I don't think that we should lower the standard, what we need to do is to build up women's capacity to be able to meet that standard. We should not be lowering standards. We should be equipping them with the necessary skills. And according to your Homa Bay investment booklet, your administration intends to promote women's economic empowerment and by facilitating financial literacy, establishing business incubation hubs, and setting up funds, a special fund for enterprise development for women through loans and grants. So tell us about this, and of course, even as a decision maker in your county and a key decision maker, within the governors, what is it that needs to be done? Is there anything that maybe county governments can do better to actually increase women's economic empowerment? You have 2 minutes.
Wow, 2 minutes. So let me just start.
You can see Professor Karuti is coming here, running.
Oh, God. So in 2 minutes, maybe what I can say is a quick comment on what has been said. Wangeshi, I think, Agpo, what you have missed to say also is even these percentages that are being given, are those people truly living with disability? Who gets paid the money from this Agpo? Are they living with disability? Are they really women? Who are really behind these companies? Because from my research, you find that there are people behind those AGPOs. They take women, even their mothers, their old grandmothers, they register them there, then they're the ones who get the money. So really the big boys and so on continue to get the money from AGPO contracts, even though they say they are AGPO. So that is one thing that we must deal with legislation. Senators are here. We must really tighten who receives the money, who is at the receiving end. Secondly, I want to just say this, and I'm using my 2 minutes quickly, to comment also on the issue of, land ownership and so on for women. And I want to just give a practical example in Homa Bay. We gave seeds to farmers. And when we were giving seeds, I went, to the ground. 70% of the people receiving the seeds were women. So they came, and then 30 were men. Then I said we have a maize mop-up program, and we put money that we now want to buy the maize after the bumper harvest. And when I went to launch the maize mop-up, the men were more than the women. And I asked, where is the M-Pesa statement? Because we were paying by M-Pesa. I want to see the M-Pesa statement of the payments we've made. 70% of the payments were going to men in the M-Pesa payments. So who's selling the maize? The men. Who was planting the maize? The women. So there is an imbalance around that we must deal with. And then also make a final comment and just say that Homa Bay, we are very blessed because on the leadership front, we have 3 women MPs out of the 8 constituencies. We have the women rep, we have a nominated woman senator, we have a woman governor. So we are really moving forward on this. And we thank the people of Homa Bay for believing in the leadership of women in terms of moving this forward. And I want to thank Honorable Muma because she was the chair of our elections committee. And she said, any woman who is on a seat is getting a direct ticket. So she really helped in terms of moving that forward. Our senator is here. She's one of the biggest women supporters there. And then just coming back to, what account is doing, and I'd already said this, in terms of policy and regulatory framework, I think it's already been mentioned, within our CIDPs, within our ADPs, within our sectoral plans, have we put these issues? And then have we translated them into budgets? Because without budget, really, even if you have a beautiful plan, it will go nowhere. And I'd just like to say in Homa Bay, we've put 80 million for an enterprise development fund to look for women traders and see how to support them. We've put 40 million for border funds to also look at the youth. We've put money for purposes of inclusion of disability, persons living with disability, giving them assistive devices and tools of trade. That is money following the policies that we've put in place. You already spoke about financial literacy, which is a big thing. And then we must deal with the barriers. And I'm just saying this because in Homa Bay, and it was said, the triple threat of HIV, infection, gender-based violence, and teenage pregnancies. We are number 2 to Narok as far as teenage pregnancies are concerned. We are, among the leaders. And this teenage pregnancy, it's a story only when you see the paper. I go to facilities every day. And every time I walk into a facility, like clockwork, there will be a child delivering a child. Like clockwork. You cannot miss a 16-year-old, 15-year-old, 12-year-old, 11-year-old. So we must deal with it. And what we are doing is working on a framework together with our other partners, NAC and LBST and many partners, EGPAF and so on, to come up with a policy framework. And we are launching it, I think, next week when there is a Maisha conference, so that we can see how to deal with the triple threat opportunity. And we have a governor's mentorship camp where we bring in girls and walk with the girls, the journey of where we need to go. I see many counties here. Governor Otichilo was here. We have county nutrition action plans, which we have to follow as far as, nutrition is concerned. And also right now, we are beginning to implement, FLOCA programs, putting women at the center of climate action. Because climate change also affects disproportionately the women. I don't know, I've done 2 minutes. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And we want to appreciate you for the work that you're doing and giving visibility to women's leadership. We've seen your kazi yako inaonekana, and we celebrate you and all the women who are so visible. Even though we are still the minority in leadership, you people are showcasing just what women can do. Congratulations and thank you. Let me come to you, Senator Catherine Muma. We have talked about the issue of teen pregnancy, but still, I've not heard an actionable point here. Her Excellency Gladys Wanga has just talked about, you go to the delivery room and you are not going to miss a child. And somehow we still are not, angry enough or even ashamed enough as a nation to put in place measures to rescue these girls and to rescue our country, because the implications for us as a society are grave, because this is about the future. You're talking about 2.3 million generations. You are the one who mentioned them. And the longer a girl stays in school, the development outcomes are better. Personal outcomes and development outcomes. I want from you, in 2 minutes,
thank you very much.
Actionable point. This is something we must do so that when we come back for the next Devolution conference, we talk about the strides because of what was done.
That will be my last point on that particular one. But here are my actionable points. One, I think we need to introduce an inclusion and impact assessment tool for the Devolution Conference, so that we came here, the governors have told us what they're doing. We need now the senators and MCAs to lead a sector that can come up with an impact and inclusion assessment tool, so that 2 years from now, we will be able to score the counties on how well they have done on inclusion, on how well they have done on impacts on these other people. I think if we do that, we will actually be moving forward. 2, we need to build capacities of actors at different levels in order to deliver on what we're saying. I can assure you this conversation has been had for the last 20 years. I can assure you I've been there. So what can we do for implementers in counties to understand how to integrate gender, how to integrate disability, how to integrate inclusion in order to do what we are saying every year that they should do? So we need capacities at that level. We need capacities among those of us who are oversighting to also understand our job. You don't get conferred with capacities on oversight because you are elected. So we need to also create a space where, and senators are already beginning on this, we want to collaborate with county assemblies in order to strengthen our oversight function and for it to be well-resourced so that we are also able to do our part as oversight. We need to also, now I'd like to advise governors, the issue of having a gender department that is purportedly the only one working on gender is a bad idea. We need your Department of Trade, your Department of Agriculture, your Department of Finance to demonstrate how well it is integrating matters, gender, youth, disability, marginalized areas in its budget. That's the only way we can actually say we are implementing. We also need to strengthen the intergovernmental relations between national county governments, county and county, in order to see how best to have the best policy at the national level, to roll out that policy at the county level. For the Senate, we need, I think you may have not heard this being said in this conference, all laws predating 2010, over 100 laws and regulations have actually not been amended. We were not able to do that within the CIC period, because I served in the CIC. So we have laws with parastatals carrying out county functions, we have, and resources being wasted. We need all those laws to be amended to align with devolved governance. And we are aware development partners are supporting other people, but they're not supporting the Senate to be able to do this. And yet the Senate will be the one moving this. So we need a concentrated effort to review all those laws, even as we are trying to get the system right. On the issue of adolescent health, we need to bring together the different multi-sectoral actors to think together, because we are acting in silos. We imagine that the adolescent, we come up with a design for adolescent pregnancy, we come up with another one for education, but this is the same individual. They need correct sex education, and if our churches feel we cannot do sex education because we are being influenced by the West, let us get the churches to develop for us the correct curriculum for Kenya. But let's have that. Let's not deny our children sex education, but allow the free internet for them to access pornographic sites. What are we doing? We are actually not working on this. So what can we do? We would need an adolescent health policy that is being implemented, not a paper policy. We need the medical training to actually hive out and start working on adolescent medicine. We need the education sector to actually include adolescent health as part of the skills development. We need internal security, Professor Kindiki, to be able to issue circulars to his chiefs, not to allow a lot of sexual violence within the homes go through the cracks because they are taking deals from those who are perpetrating. We need the Minister for ICT to do something about the internet that is facilitating access to pornography and cybercrime that is actually targeting our children. I know of a story of a person's daughter who was actually lured on the internet and had taken money at home and traveled and had reached Tanzania, going to meet a boyfriend somewhere in Southern Africa. I know people who actually have complained about their children on the internet. Are we doing anything about that? No. But every time somebody talks about sex education, we are all up in arms. We don't want sex education. We need to wake up and do something about all of that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator Catherine Muma. We need to do something about it. Anna, 2 minutes, strictly 2 minutes. 1 minute. Advancing cross-sector partnerships between governments, the UN family, UN women, working with civil society, private sector, and other key stakeholders. How are you strengthening? What will you do towards strengthening gender perspectives, addressing these issues that we're talking about, the triple threat? What do we need to do around women's economic empowerment, AGPO, because I know that UN Women are keen on women's economic empowerment, and of course the issue of unpaid care work, which I think is a devolved issue. I mean, the devolved governments have a central role in playing. 2 minutes.
Thank you. Your question took longer than 2 minutes. All right. No, I'll be very, very quick. I'll try to be very, very quick. The first issue, I think, for us is to ensure that counties have the data that they need to be able to make decisions on all of these issues we've talked about. So the centrality of data. And I think that's what the UN system that's supporting devolution programs is really fixated with. Are we ensuring that you have the data you need and be able to analyze it and be able to draw decisions from that data? So that's our number one support. Ensuring availability, accessibility, analysis, and use of data. So we have invested quite a lot with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, but also with the county governments that we are working with to make sure the data is there, is available from a gender perspective. So we paint the picture for you from a gender and child and disability perspective. But what we have seen is the lack of capacity then to use that data. So, you know, you produce a whole meal, a banquet, but then uptake is very, very small. So I think that's the next stage we need to get to. What do we make of this data that is now available in my county? Do we have the capacity to understand, analyze it, and use it to inform the policy decisions, the budgets, the plans, and so on? The second issue is, I think, what has been so well articulated by both Senator and Governor here, and it's the issue of gender-responsive budgeting. We have the public finance management systems for budgeting, for expenditure tracking, and for reporting. I think there is also a cabinet memo to this effect that where we have mapped out what the issues on gender equality are, we need to follow them up with appropriate budgets. We need to be able to report on those issues, how much was spent and with what impact, right? And then really institutionalize how we do all of this. So I think that we need to step up on our issue of spending for gender equality, because as they say, you put your money where your mouth is, right? So I think the Senator has just spoken very well on the issue of teenage pregnancy. I will not try to add any more to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. To you, Carla, one actionable point.
Thank you very much. A lot has been said, but again, to really implement the recommendations, we need to review the laws that we have and improve them, and of course, establish the new ones that they can really target the challenges that we face. So let's look at that. But for that to happen, again, I agree, funding. Funding is really critical. If I look at the agri-food systems again, His Excellency the President on his inaugural speech, he spoke about really the to unlock the potentials in agriculture. And to unlock those potentials, we have land, we have a market, and we have a vibrant workforce, women and youth. But we can only do that if we really fund. With less than 10% that we have agreed in Malabo, we cannot really create all those, let's say, infrastructures that we need. Irrigation is really so important, climate smart agriculture. So really funding is essential. And I also want to add that it's really important that we create really opportunities for peer-to-peer really learning, creating those spaces. As we implement our project as FAO, we really make sure that we create the spaces where the communities, with the leaders, they come, they share, they raise those issues. And we have seen that in those cases, even GBV really reduce and other challenges that we face. So I think this is data. Actually, it's really essential. We cannot really measure what we don't account for, and really establishing tools so that we can track the progress. It's really critical.
Thank you so much, Carla. To Mr. Harun.
Yeah, thank you so much.
One actionable point.
Yeah, full implementation of disability categorization assessment guidelines, which is now a fully devolved function, a policy guidelines from Ministry of Health. As a council, we have already trained all county directors of health, 47 out of 47, and over 300, members of that team. And since this is the most important thing insofar as data is concerned, there is activity, there is function there that county government need to really pick it up so that we can have accurate data. Right now, the conversation is at the COG, the Secretariat with us, and a few times also with the COG Health Committee. We want the county governors to make it a resolution and to cascade it down that this is a requirement. And then county disability framework. Many counties don't have county disability framework or county laws. Few of them have. Like Wajir, for example. The other day, Shaheen and I were in Wajir, and the county government of Wajir probably, interestingly, came up with a law, and they have allocated 40 million, and they're implementing cash transfer program of over 8,000, 4,000, even double what national government. That's what we really need to look at, so that even in areas where the counties, there is no MCAs or there is no that maybe goodwill or whatever, for lack of a better word, that legal framework can help them. Because government also has introduced amendment to the Disability Act that created National Council, for example. The only piece of law which has not conformed with the current constitution. And in that bill that is already with the National Assembly and also with the Senate, there is a whole chapter in the county, making it that there is a clear framework on how matters disability will be addressed. We had also a conversation, I have to mention there, with Prime Cabinet Secretary on issues of performance indicator. There's a bill that's also coming on public performance indicator, which also includes the touches on county government, that indicator around disability in public service delivery will be a mandatory. And finally, disabilities on rights, I have to say this. It's not from the traditional causes like polio or measles, because of advance in health, those who are fixed, or because of accident. I'm using this wheelchair because of road accident. Diabetes is maiming a lot. Stroke, cancer, name it. So we don't want, a lot of people to be disabled, but in the event one finds himself there, let us work collectively to make our world a better place for all of us. And the civility of the society, of any nation, or any leadership, is measured by history taught us how we embrace the causes of those who are at margins or at periphery in our society. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very well said, Mr. Harun. Wangeshi, 1 minute.
Wow.
Your actionable point.
Thank you, Daisy. I think for me, we have an opportunity because we already have a prototype policy around issues of gender, because gender is around issues of inclusion. If we're able to have all our 47 counties having a gender policy, the counties that don't have, they develop, they resource, and fully implement. I will also talk about issues of implementation of two-thirds, and implementation of two-thirds at the county level. We know for the MCAs is already done deal. But when it comes to the appointee, and I'm speaking to the governors in the room, Your Excellence, that's a place that is very, very easy to be able to get the women. And then this gender CC, it's loaded with many things. It's usually gender, culture, education. Wow, it's mouthful. that office needs to be resourced, because if you're really going to be meaningful in change, it cannot be loaded, because those things are too many to be handled by one person. And then let it also be elevated so that it can be able to get the resources that it does require. And finally, working with the MCAs, I think let's support them in terms of their legislation role, their oversight role, but also representation. Because at the end of the day, this is about inclusion, it's about leaving no one behind, and it's about prosperity of our nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wangeshi. Madam Grace Wasike, although you are also the one to take action, perhaps yours is not an actionable point, but more a commitment, what you commit yourselves as ministry to do.
Okay, thank you, Daisy. So I'll just add on to what the rest have said, that we need to have gender mainstreamed in the CIDPs for counties, because we realize that most counties are not integrating gender in the CIDPs. And we'd also wish that the gender sector working groups are supported at the county level, because we realize that they're having issues with especially financial support. And lastly, I would like to urge the counties to help us as a ministry to spread the good gospel of the re-engineered Women Enterprise Fund, because this is a fund that is now online and it is moving very fast. It was rolled out 1st of July, but right now we have almost 400 million which has been disbursed, compared to what previously used to be disbursed in 1 month. We are almost double that number. But our worry is that maybe there are women out there who are not able to access the fund. Until we do an analysis after the first quarter to know who is actually getting that fund, we'll not be able to tell whether the far-flanked counties, women are able to access that fund. So my request to the county governments is to help us sensitize the women on the availability and accessibility of that fund. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I have the QR code for the report, a very interesting report with so much data that can really inform our decisions. So I just want to say that it's available. I will share as we come down.
So maybe Council of Governors will do that. Shaheen, your final point? 1 minute.
Right. I think a lot's been said already. For me, the first thing is to start where we are or where we left. So it is about implementing the existing policies, facilities, and practices. But also what is important is we need to walk the talk, and the time is now. Primarily, as all the governor and parliamentarians and others spoke about it, is to ensure it's not just enough to say that it has been included into the plan. Budgets need to follow, then we need to see the expenditures, and ultimately it is about the results and impacts that needs to be taken to scale. In terms of the recommendations that has already been laid out, I would like to emphasize the whole issue about the recommendations that was handed over yesterday by the pre-conference, children's pre-conference recommendations needed to be also looked into it. There's some of the issues that the distinguished panel members have pointed out is something around mental health, teenage pregnancy, a whole lot of issues that has been spoken about it. And the last thing is about across sectors, as Madam mentioned about it, across sectors in the CIDPs, we need to ensure the indicators do reflect the issue of inclusion. And finally, the performance contract must also mention about what are the leadership doing about in the respective counties with respect to walking the talk. Over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a hand, big hand for our panelists. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to be here for this important discussion. Affirmative action is a very important discussion. And thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you.
It's a photograph, I guess.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause, please, for that panel. Stay there for a photo. You've had some very, very, very good discussions, and it's good for us to keep that on record and have you also memorizing this. There's a photo session. We want to have a photo right up on the stage. Up on the stage. Up. Sorry. Asante sana. Another round of applause, please, for the panel. The moderator, Daisy Mdanyi from Crown Trusts, Dr. Shaheen Nilofa, who's the UNICEF Kenya representative, and the panelists, Governor Her Excellency Gladys Wanga, Senator Catherine Muma. We heard Mr. Harun Hassan, Ann Mutavati, Carla Mukavi, and Wangeshi Wachira. Asanteni sana. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are drawing closer to the closing ceremony for this afternoon. As we do that, I just want to recap on what's been happening the last 4 days, from Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday to today, and what we've been doing. So basically, the Devolution Conference began on Tuesday, when we had a couple of activities. And there were some competitions. There was athletics, there was football. But let's start by showing you what happened on Tuesday in the marathon. Watch this.
The reason why we are here is because of pre-conference activity athletics, and later we are going to have a football match pitting the senators and the governors. The reason why athletics nowadays is entrenched in the devolution program is that we are in the home of champions.
This race is going to be participated also by all the governors, all the senators who are present.
Tumekuja hapa kwa hii mbio, nimeleta wazee na wazee huwa wakiwakilisha Kenya na watakimbia vizuri sana. Hata kuna wazee veterans ambao wanakimbia full marathon hapa, kuna wenye wanakimbia half marathon kama mimi, na kuna wenye wanakimbia 10 kilometers na track and field events.
Nataka ning'ang'ane niingie top 10. Yeah. At least top 10 tapata something yenye poa.
Bio leo ilikuwa competitive. Nimepumzika tu siku moja. Nashukuru kwanza kwa ma-governance kwa kutoa hii event ambayo tumefurahia sisi wote kama wakimbiaji. At least wametukumbuka na inakuza talanta. Imetusaidia leo kuwa exposure na ku grow young talent.
Mbio za leo haikuwa rahisi. Ilikuwa uchungu, lakini nashukuru Mungu nimewin. Tulikuwa wengi so na unajua Kenya vile wanakimbia si rahisi, lakini nashukuru Mungu. Tunashukuru sana kwa county government of Eldoret kwa kutusaidia hii mbio, na tunaomba wasidishe mbio zingine.
Unajua kisema kwamba wanakimbia kwa sababu ya devolution, lazima to give it all. kwa sababu devolution ni kila kitu sasa. Yetu tumekuja mashinani, pesa tumekuja mashinani, uwezo kutumia pesa iko mashinani, nataka kupambana na matatizo mashinani. So jiambia kimbia kwa sababu ya devolution, lazima wanajitolea kabisa.
We have the VIP designated seats for our MPs, governors, and senators who will be coming in as the Deputy President comes in. So when he comes in, we'll be organizing the stage. Now, what we'd like to do is show you what happened on Wednesday. And Wednesday was the official launch of this Devolution Conference 2023. Take a look.
Welcome to day one of the Devolution Conference, with this year's theme being the present and the future. We are here at the Eldoret Arboretum, where a tree planting activity will take place and the unveil of the Wall of Fame.
This morning, we are here at this arboretum in Eldoret town, where we are planting trees. All the governors, all the senators, and the president will be coming very soon to plant his tree. This will be a landmark arboretum which will go into history, marking 10 years of devolution. And as a Council of Governors, we have committed ourselves to ensuring that we achieve the 15 billion tree planting that has been directed by the President by the year 2032. Since March to date, the 47 counties have planted a total of 7.4 million trees across the country.
I'm privileged to attend the Devolution conference. I've been attending them since 2013, and I can see a lot of improvement on this one. The organization is superb, and we are happy. And I'm particularly impressed by the address by His Excellency the President of the Republic of Kenya, William Ruto, on what he said, the support to devolution, the disbursement of funds to devolve units, and particularly to unleash the remaining devolved functions to the counties.
Devolution inafanya kazi kwa sababu kila kitu imekuja ground.
We are excited about being the host of the first biannual conference, with the theme being 10 years of devolution.
We call upon both the national government and county governments to take the following concrete steps. On devolution and children's rights, review all laws and policy to ensure universal access to children's rights, leaving no one behind, especially teenage girls who fall pregnant while in school.
Devolution has been a cornerstone of our efforts to bring governance closer to the people, empower our counties, and catalyze economic growth from the grassroots up, that is bottom up.
We should spend the entire allocation on development positively, contribute towards the country's growth and service delivery.
The discourse in this conference will revolve around Kenya's devolution journey since 2013, the ups and downs, the slips and the skips, the challenges and the triumphs.
I want to take this early opportunity to commend the Council of Governors. You have been able to find a way around our sometimes toxic and divisive politics. You have been able to create a leadership that looks past party and political differences and moves you forward as a team. 10 years into devolution, Kenya is a much transformed landscape with an amazing opportunity for rural economic revival and transformation.
Heard since morning, and allow me once again to request those of us who are still outside, kindly let's all come in, grab a seat and settle down before we have His Excellency the Deputy President join us for this closing ceremony. Na pia kama unakaa pale nyuma, tafadhali kwa heshima tunaomba tusonge mbele. We occupy the front seats from the white ones, a little bit from the red, from the middle part, so that we settle in, tumsikie tukiwa wote. Kama tuko nje mkisikia sauti, tafadhali tukuje sehemu hii. We sit down, we settle together and wait for His Excellency the Deputy President to arrive. Asanteni, once again we are reminded you're going to have the national anthem, the East African anthem, you're going to have a prayer, and thereafter we are going to be led into the rest of the program by today's Master of Ceremony. Asanteni sana, tuendelee kusonga karibu so that we witness the 10th devolution ceremony, closing ceremony, which is going to be graced by the Deputy President of our beloved nation, Honorable Rigathi Gachagua. Our studios, tafadhali tuendelee.
Thank you very much. One interesting one. It has had its many wins, many gains, many challenges. The next video that we want to show you is recapping the journey of devolution.
County governments have since 2013 carried the hope of better service delivery and a more equitable Kenya.
County governments are the real drivers of socio-economic development all the way to the village and community level. The journey of devolution in Kenya is inscribed in a book by the Council of Governors and published with the support of partners. This book highlights the transition from a centralized to a devolved system of government. Under this system, the Constitution has assigned the county government specific functions, powers, and responsibilities. The Constitution also makes provisions for the resourcing of county governments. In health, across the country, the healthcare system has witnessed tremendous improvement from the community level to mid-level facilities such as sub-county and county referral hospitals. Progressively, health services have been brought closer to the people.
With the devolution, the supervision and also oversight is made very closely so that service delivery is monitored at a close range.
After the inception of devolution, county governments have amplified the construction and equipping of health facilities, increasing human resources for health with a keen focus on preventive healthcare.
Coming into devolution, major investments from 2013 have been done in health. One key area is health infrastructure in terms of the health facilities.
Now we have community health volunteers, community health workers, and community health assistants. These are cadres that have really plugged the gap which used to miss.
Before 2013, patients from all over the country traveled to Nairobi for treatment of non-communicable diseases and to seek specialized services such as dialysis and
Boss is in so that we are just settled. If you have people on the other tent, our ushers together with the security team, maybe the studios, you can make me more audible so that other people may listen to what I'm trying to say. If you are standing outside, with all humility, we are requested to step in and occupy the seats. And then with the help of our ushers, tafadhalini, let's help us get people from the other tent so that we fill in this tent, so that we are settled for the event. Tafadhalini, kama mko nje and you could get my voice. Kwa heshima tujongee hii tent yenye iko hii sehemu ingine so that we are settled down and wait for His Excellency the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya, who will make his way any time from now to this event. Tafadhalini, our ushers and the security team, thank you so much everyone who is finding or making their way here. We also want to take this opportunity to recognize the presence of all senior government officers who are here, the governors of various counties, the senators, the members of parliament who are here, the development partners, all stakeholders towards this devolution conference. We acknowledge you and we urge you to feel at home. Asanteni. Our studios have still urged our people to join us. Thanks.
County governments have made progressive actions to increase access and quality of healthcare for county residents. For instance, they have established relations with development partners and also implemented a facility improvement financing model, that is FIF, to give health facilities operational and financial autonomy. In the agriculture sector, in order to modernize farming, some county governments have employed village-based advisors, that is VBAs, to provide extension services for modern farming techniques. The VBAs have clusters of lead farmers under them for mentoring and monitoring.
Tangu tuanze hii chama ya VBA tumefaidika juu tumepata mbegu mpya juu tulikuwa tukipanda mbegu za ile ya Kikuyu. Kitambo sikuwa nikipata harvest in time. Lakini sasa hata kwangu sinunuagi uga.
In an effort to embrace aggregation and joint marketing, counties have promoted farmers' corporations. These corporations help develop market linkages as well as negotiate for better prices for their members' produce.
Watu hawakuwa pamoja, walikuwa wanauza vibaya. Currently, tunauza hayo matunda kwa 77 shillings, inabaki 70 shillings. Ile inaenda direct kwa mkulima.
Additionally, county governments have partnered with the private sector, development partners, and the national government to fund projects that are beneficial to the residents. Vulnerable farmers have been supported and are now engaging in agribusiness and value addition initiatives that attract a better income.
County wanaweza kutulipia tuende mahali tukasome. Unaweza kutumia watu wakuja kwa msomese.
Kitabu ziwawili ikaenda ikizaa.
We have modern hatchery where we do sex reversal of tilapia fingerlings to have the all-male fingerlings through hormone treatment.
County governments have addressed water scarcity issues in many parts of the country. In some counties, residents covered long distances in search of clean water, taking approximately 6 to 7 hours. County governments have established water service providers, drilled boreholes, constructed water pans, and installed water stations for the residents to get water closer to them.
Kabla ugatuzi ilikuwa shida ya maji Kizingitini ilikuwa ni kubwa sana.
From New York Times Opinion, this is The Ezra Klein Show. Hey, it is Ezra. I am on book leave, but this week taking a turn at the mic is Jane Coaston. She's a Times opinion writer. She has done years of work covering modern republicanism, conservatism, the populist right, and all of the schisms and fractures within. It's a topic we've been trying to do more work on, so I was grateful she's willing to come on the show and do some conversations around it. Enjoy.
In 1964, 73% of Republicans said they trusted the federal government to do the right thing almost always or most of the time. Today, that number is down to 9%. And it's not just the government. You can see that same basic trend for the media, for public schools, for universities. You can't understand the modern Republican Party without understanding this complete collapse in trust in mainstream institutions. Which is why I was interested in having a conversation with Mary Catherine Ham. Ham is a fourth-generation journalist and conservative writer who has appeared on CNN, Fox News, and ABC News. And a core theme of her work is the way that American institutions, from the CDC to the Department of Education to the mainstream media, have failed again and again to serve Americans. Ham and I disagree on a lot. I'm old enough to recall the events that led up to the Iraq War, and old enough to have read a fair amount about FBI surveillance of dissidents and the ways in which so-called objective reporters called LGBT people deviates. So it is slightly amusing to me that Republicans have just now decided that the federal government is worthy of distrust. But I think hers is a perspective that's worth hearing out. First, because there's some real truth to it, but also because it's a perspective that has become dominant on the American right today. As always, you can email the show with your thoughts and guest recommendations at ezrakleinshow@nytimes.com. Mary Catherine Ham, welcome to the Ezra Klein Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you've written that this country so desperately needs a reliable narrator, and every major institution and figure just refuses to be one. That is the overall theme of a lot of your work, is a growing distrust or the state of distrust, largely from conservatives in American institutions. Why do you think that's happened?
In large part because the institutions deserve it. I am at heart was raised an ink-stained wretch. I'm a fourth-generation newspaper journalist. My great-grandfather started the illustrious newspaper in beautiful Pitts, Georgia. And then his son was a writer for that paper. And then my dad was a newspaper editor, and now me. And I worked in newspapers before they fell off a cliff in the mid-2000s. So my take on media is often, help me help you. I want this to be better. I want to have a fourth estate that is strong, that people can believe. And I feel like far too often, and frankly, during the COVID era, in some pretty obviously disturbing ways, we got past sort of basic bias or not knowing what the other side believed and into actual suppression. And that understandably makes people turned off, right? That understandably is a trust issue. And I've spoken about it for years that, particularly in media, there's a lack of introspection. Despite the fact that trust numbers are so low and we should be very concerned about that as an industry, there tends to be a tendency to put it on the audience. Like, gosh, they're just not receiving us correctly. And it's like, well, maybe we could think about some of the things that we've done that would make them not receive us well.
You've talked about the 2016 election as a turning point for you in terms of media trust. I think every major publication published some sort of what happened, right. Usually with like that headline and that kind of vocal effect. 538 did a version, The Times did a version, The Washington Post did a version. Everybody did a what did we do wrong, what happened story. But it's clear that that wasn't sufficient for you, and I think for a lot of people. Why?
Okay, so I do appreciate an attempt to piece this together. And I think there were some attempts made. They were sort of short-lived. And I think after the attempt is made, people fall back into the habit of like, we're just going to see this the way we see it. And the concern I had was not that Trump didn't do bad things. I was opposed to him the entirety of 2016. I'm on CNN talking about it. But it was that because you can imagine that this person you don't like did a terrible thing does not mean that we have the facts to support that. And I don't want to get there. And I also don't want to disrespect the people who voted for him and write them off, even though I didn't, because that's a large part of the country. And it's a large part of the country that you need to have trust with. The other thing about sort of calling elections, and look, I have no pristine record in this case, but I do think when the entire industry gets something so wrong, which is seeing Donald Trump coming. Now, to be fair, Donald Trump didn't see himself winning. That was a surprise to him. However, I thought, man, it is a problem if we all put our TV dresses and our ties on the next day and tell everybody, well, here we are to just analyze again. Well, you just really, really messed up. If you don't own up to that in that moment, I think people go, oh, great, they're just putting on their act again and they're not being trustworthy.
So I've always thought that the idea of quote unquote trusting media seems misplaced to me. For one thing, I've noticed that a lot of the people who are like very angry at the New York Times still have New York Times bestselling writer in their Twitter bio. There's really a sense of like, it's an authority when we want it to be, and it's not an authority when we're mad at it. For another thing, a lot of the people who will say that they distrust media, they trust somebody. Should they?
To my mind, what I end up doing, and this is something that I think the former Twitter, the artist formerly known as Twitter, was actually good for, is that when I joined Twitter many, many years ago, too many, you could cultivate this personally tailored stream of people you trust. Now, that of course means on left and right that often you end up with a stream of people who agree with you. Mm-hmm. I attempt very proactively to fill my feed with people I do not agree with. I attempt to read their stuff in good faith and disagree in good faith. I grew up in an all-liberal town. If I had not been able to disagree in good faith my entire life, I would have had no one to talk to. And so that's an important part of how I think you can gain perspective on news. I don't pick outlets. I generally pick reporters or I pick commentators who I feel like are dealing with me on the facts, who will tell me stuff that is against perhaps the prevailing narrative, because that takes some courage. That, to me, is one of the parts of new media that is good and can be exhausting, is that you are forming your own sort of newsroom personally, and then to challenge yourself and make sure that newsroom is not everyone who agrees with you. Because I say this all the time. I speak on college campuses as the one weirdo right-winger they invite, and I say, be the weirdo in the room. It's hard, but rooms need weirdos because they need their ideas tested. And I attempt to have a little bit of backbone to occasionally be that weirdo.
Right. There's been this constant discussion. A lot of my work has focused on covering conservatism in the age of Trump. And a lot of the criticism I've gotten is that either I am giving cover to the worst elements of some of American society by trying to make sense of it and trying to put it into some sort of conservative parlance or putting it into context, or I'm not being nice enough to very nice conservatives, and this is how we got Trump. Which I've always thought to be such a funny argument, that like things were awful and that's why we had to get this guy we like. Like, that's not how that works. But a lot of publications are thinking about how do you cover, or to use the term platform, which I actually kind of hate because that kind of implies that you are just like, you pick somebody up and you're like, here you go.
Right.
I think that conservatives might remember in 2020, NPR did an interview with someone who wrote a book about how riots essentially were good and that riots were a good idea. And this was this interview with this person who had written this book. And I think some of the coverage of that book that I saw in right-leaning outlets was essentially, one, how dare this person write this book? Two, how dare this person's book get covered in NPR? And three, how dare this person's book and ideas get engaged with on NPR or in any outlet? And so I'm curious how you think about this problem of, one, what does it even mean to platform? Are we saying that this idea is good or bad, even if you get to see it? Two, how do you engage with those ideas? Some, extreme ideas, or extreme, again, take your pick of what that means, with context and pushback while making it readable, perceivable. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so on the platforming question, I'm in favor of just like really wide latitude on the ideas that adults can engage with. Now, I think the argument on the NPR coverage of that book is that, okay, you have a book that's explicitly saying writing can be great.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that a similarly extreme take on the right would get similar coverage in the same outlet, I think is on its face obvious that would not happen, right?
Right.
So I think a lot of it comes from that. Like, this is legitimized while we are pathologized. You can engage with this stuff without maybe doing either of those things. So I think like a wide latitude is good. When it comes to platforming Trump, it's like, well, he's by a vast leading candidate for one of the major parties. So I disagreed with the idea that Licht had gone wrong in having him in this town hall.
Chris Licht, formerly
of CNN, had the Trump town hall. The interlocutor was Caitlin Collins. Put her up there, asked some tough questions. Now, would I have done it slightly differently? I think he was very brazen about, oh yeah, it is a super pro-Trump crowd, and I would have maybe had some more ground rules for that, which I think would have made it a better situation. So some of it is just reading the room. However, I think you can engage with plenty of ideas and critique them without denigrating entire parts of the population who might also be engaging with those ideas. I also hate the idea on TV or Twitter or whatever it is, and this happened a lot during the Trump years, that if you engage in providing context and saying, okay, well, how big is this Trump offense? Let's compare it to things we've seen in the past, that is treated as Trump boosting. I actually think the context is bringing us closer to understanding this issue than further away. So I don't like the idea that engaging in walking through each of these things and not imagining your Trump narrative as opposed to really comparing it to history, that's off limits, that makes you some kind of sellout, because I think you're actually informing people.
So we've seen this conversation more recently with Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his views, generally centering on vaccines, but also ranging from believing that the Koch brothers should be sent to prison to something about COVID as a bioweapon. I think that there have been a lot of good arguments about how his views are shared by some people and his views deserve to be heard and then contested. But I'm curious as to your thoughts as to, I wrote down crackpottery, which I've decided now I really like that as a noun. But each of us, and I think we kind of have a general consensus as to the crackpottery, we're like, we'll listen to this. And the crackpottery, we're like, no, this isn't acceptable. Out and out Holocaust denial, for example. So in a country as broad as ours, and with media whose incentives are there because it's grabby and interesting, and the incentives to cover him, especially for conservatives who don't like Joe Biden very much, are very much there. But I am interested in how you think about, like, anti-vaccine views we can engage with. Holocaust denial, can't engage with. How do we think about whose crackpottery we listen to and engage with, and again, challenge, to be clear, and whose are we like, nope, that's anathema?
I think it's a sliding scale. I would like the parameters to be like way out here on the left and right, just because I'm pretty crackpotty myself on that, just on the idea of airing these things. So I want the parameters to be wide. I also think what RFK Jr. is tapping into, well, he's covered one because like he's a Kennedy, and he's getting not a small amount of percentage in this non-primary race that's sort of happening under the radar. He's getting equivalent to many and more percentage points than many of the GOP contenders against Trump, right? So I think that's interesting because there's a market that's being served here. Now, a lot of coverage has attempted to sort of pin him on the right. Like, he's a man of the right. I'm like, well, he's literally a Kennedy running in the Democratic primary. So I'm not sure about that. But I think what people miss in trying to make him a man of the right is that there's a real coming together of the right and left. Now, some of it is crackpottery, but in this area of massive distrust, and that there's a real reason for it. I think Michelle Goldberg nailed it in her column about him. He is the candidate of the distrustful. And those folks, because they have been lied to or misled on other things, are going to be inclined to believe they're not hearing the truth on many things. And some of the things they really are, right? This is I'm sure it's probably universal, but it feels very much the problem of our time is parsing when I think I'm getting the straight story from institutions, from media, and telling people, no, you're conspiracizing about this thing. Except then that thing like sort of ends up being true. And I have to mea culpa on that and be like, I was trying to be reasonable, but you actually were correct about this one. They were hiding the ball on this. So we have a real problem with that. And it does create grounds for more conspiracy theories.
Right. We talk about how there's this rising distrust, but that seems to me to rely on a halcyon story of American institutions, including the media, a version in which there used to be a limited number of media institutions, and they would all kind of generally agree on what got covered and what didn't get covered. And you see again and again how stories that were impactful, if you go back through the New York Times archives and just look for the word homosexuality, how stories that were particularly impactful in the lives of minorities, from African Americans to LGBT people, were just not covered, or covered them as if they were speaking for a general audience that thought they were weird and gross and should be isolated. And so the idea of distrusting major institutions, including the media, seems to be just kind of how we should generally feel. That old story for journalists that if your mother tells you that she loves you, you should double check. Should that just be how we think about institutions?
Yes. And I'll bring you a moment of unity from the CNN set over those Trump years. But Angela Rye and I used to be on together. She's certainly a left-leaning commentator, I would say quite liberal. We're far apart on issues, but we are not far apart on distrust of institutions. And so when there was a widespread compulsion to just say the intelligence community and the FBI are full of unassailable public servants doing what we need them to do. And how dare you try to question the work that they're doing? Angela and I would look at each other and be like, is this the FBI that spied on Martin Luther King? That's the one we're talking about, right? And this is where I think, again, the historical context can be helpful to people when you're talking about this. Instead of Angela Rye's no Trump booster by a long shot, but she has a healthy distrust of an institution that has earned that distrust. I think one of the problems with media is it does appear to me, and it does appear accelerated in the past 10 years or so, when one side is in charge of the institutions, there is far less skepticism. I would like there to be tons of skepticism all the time. I struggle with how not to tip into cynicism, but I am largely skeptical of all government endeavors, and they have the power, unlike any other institution, to violently withhold your freedom. So I think that's important. It's important to ask questions of them. And if my side is in charge, that doesn't mean that things are going swimmingly. I don't want to go back to a time when there were 3 newscasts and that all the facts came from those people. I love that the internet gives us primary coverage, primary documents that you can go back and read yourself that are not filtered through someone else. Now, you're going to build your own filters, and sometimes those filters are going to be faulty, and you need to test yourself on that. But you can find more primary information than we've ever had access to in the past, from government, from candidates, from events that you were not at. And I think that that's important and valuable. And I think perhaps people are more distrustful because they see more things. There's more available to them to parse these things. And then sometimes I think they're wrong, but they're seeing more of the picture sometimes and seeing what was kept from them, just as other populations had seen that earlier.
So we've been talking about institutions that are made up of a lot of actors and many complex organizations, talking about the media. How do you think about rebuilding an institution, even if you can say the media is an institution, where there's no central governing body that drives the media?
Look, it is all distributed and it is all changing. This is not to get too existential about it, but we talk about these institutions as if they have been in stasis at any particular time, right? They have been changing with administrations. They have been changing with cultural winds. They have been changing with economic forces for decades. I mean, I watched newspapers falling off the ledge, right? That happened right when I was in them in 2004 or 5, and happened to move to sort of a new media position and was like, hey, look at that. But these things have been changing for a long time. I do not know how you institute, for instance, a cultural understanding that raucous debate and free speech is good, which I think should be the default position of journalists. Once that cultural understanding is gone, particularly in elite universities, from where many journalists are coming, I don't know how you reinstitute that. What would be nice? So when you come into an organization that is ostensibly a practitioner of free speech, maybe there's a onboarding that includes some talk of that and why it's important, because they're not getting it often in college. In the context of that, you can talk about the problems that we must grapple with while we're having that conversation, right? But I do think, there's plenty of money spent on onboarding about many, many, many other issues. And perhaps that should be one of them that is part of the discussion in your training.